This Verse, and today I'm going to be reviewing Master of Poisons by Andrea Hairston. I received an advanced reader's copy of this book from NetGalley in exchange for a fair and honest review. Thank you to the publisher for making this book accessible to me. All opinions are my own. So this book is set in a secondary world in the Archesian Empire, which is facing environmental disaster. Overfishing and deforestation are leading to the erosion of farmland, the expansion of the desert, and the appearance of unpredictable magical void storms. This story is told from the perspective of primarily of two narrating characters: Jola, the idealistic master of poisons, who brokered peace between the ethnic groups inside the Archesian Empire many years ago and saved the emperor from assassination. There's Awa, a young girl with an affinity for Smokeland, the realm of possibility, whose puritanical father sells her to keep his struggling farm afloat. Both of these characters are idealistic. They're both map makers and lovers of animals, but aside from that, they're both on very different paths. In terms of story structure and the world, I feel like the closest thing I could compare this to is the Neverending Story. I feel like the fantasy world is similar in that there's a lot of different factions and a lot of different groups and a lot of different things going on, and there isn't a big, focus on politics and the world's internal logic. The Void Storms were basically created from lost possibility, and so that seems very similar to the Nothing. And both stories have an emphasis on thought and imagination and sculpting the future. So in terms of what I was expecting coming into the story, I had read Mindscape, which was a very mixed bag for me, but I wasn't necessarily completely turned off from Andrea Hairston's writing. I was intrigued when I heard this story. I have friends who really enjoy Andrea Hairston's stuff, and so I wanted to give her writing another try. I was really looking forward to the story of environmental catastrophe that isn't ozone related. I feel like a lot of environmental disaster in pop culture has been, looking at climate change and issues with the atmosphere or sort of deforestation. Deforestation does play a role in this story, but in terms of how I've seen that played out in pop culture, it's often a focus on sort of the very immediate effects in terms of the effects on wildlife and stuff like that, and not necessarily the larger effects of soil loss and all that other stuff, which this novel gets into a little bit more. With that said, this was a very involved read. I was already taking notes just because I knew that I was reading this for a review, but I definitely did have to keep track of okay, something was introduced, what is it, to make sure that I actually understood everything that I was reading. This is a very large world, like I said. There's a lot of ethnic groups. The magic system is kind of nebulous. I feel like all the factions feel a little bit more chaotic. The world is a little bit harder for me to get a beat on. I felt new concepts of the magic or what certain ethnic groups were doing and what they were known for. And I felt like they would kind of be introduced, they'd show up, and then you wouldn't get a fuller explanation until a few chapters down the line. So it definitely was confusing. The way it's structured, it's multiple points of view. The two main narrators, like I said, are Awa and Jola, and occasionally a few of their animal companions will narrate a chapter or so. And the chapters are really short. They're a couple pages each. And in the beginning, for about the first half of the book, Awa and Jola are very tangentially related. They sort of have mutuals in common, but their paths don't really cross and their goals don't really cross. And so it made it really difficult for me to settle in and get my bearings and get into the story, because it just felt like there was so much stuff going on and I wasn't really able to tell what Awa and Jola had to do with each other. And it was really difficult for me to stay motivated to keep reading it. And then after the 50% mark, when Awa and Jola meet up, the story felt like it had more purpose. It felt more cohesive. It was a lot easier for me to get through everything. In terms of things that I enjoyed about the book, Andrea Hairston's writing is gorgeous as always. The food sounds delicious. The fantasy world sounds lush and beautiful. The landscapes, the buildings, the clothes. There's this other realm called Smokeland, which is a realm of possibility and dreams. The descriptions of that are really cool. She had some songs in there which didn't really do anything for me, but I felt like it added to the overall atmosphere of the story because storytelling and song are very important to the characters. This one felt like much more close to home. Like it felt like it was a lot more obvious why Hairston had chosen to write this book and what she was trying to address when she wrote it. I enjoyed how the world of the Arkeesian Empire, sexuality and gender are a little bit more fluid. Same gender couples kind of casually happen. There are people who might be considered non-binary. They're called Vessens. They are accepted in some places, but they are demonized in some circles of the Empire. And that is sort of like a main core concept of the story. Another thing that I really enjoyed was the relationships that the characters have with the animals. I'd literally been scripting a video talking about why I thought there weren't more fantasy authors using animals as the point of view characters, and this one I thought incorporated animals in a really interesting and unique way. In terms of themes and motifs of the story, I'd say a big one is polyrhythms. There's a lot of emphasis on sound and music because Awa is sold to a group of green elders. They're very spiritual, they practice magic, and polyrhythms are the basis of their conjure. Polyrhythms are also a metaphorical thing. They stand for multiplicity and contradiction, and sort of how important that is to understanding the world. There's this idea that comes up throughout the story of Lahesh diplomacy, which is basically that the Lahesh don't necessarily invade and fight their opponents. They have this slogan basically to marry the enemy, winning and living and thriving and spreading through basically joining with people who are opposed to you or different from you and kind of like winning them over to your side and assimilating them in that way. The main villain is a conjurer where Awa and the Lahesh focus on the many, the multiple. This villain focuses on the one, and that shows up in a lot of descriptions about him. Like, he's very self-centered. His supporters are described as sounding like one voice from many mouths. When Awa goes into Shadowland, many of his followers that he has in that realm bear his face. Another thing that comes up a lot are language and stories. Again, in terms of language, there are multiple ethnic groups and there are multiple languages spoken throughout. And there's an emphasis on how language affects how you think, and just like how language affects how we think in terms of our perceptions and like our manifestations for like the future and like what we want for the future and what we expect from the future. So that was a really big thing. Maps are kind of a motif throughout the story, sort of tied into language and stories and imagining a future. And another big theme in here was about denial and complicity. So there are people who are actively deforesting, overfishing because it is in their interest. They make money off of it and it enables them to live a certain lifestyle. But Hairston also interrogates how people who know that this is happening and don't do anything are also enabling that to occur. And that's like a big moral conflict for some of the characters. I think at some point all the characters kind of want to point a finger at someone and say, it's all your fault. And I think all of them at some point have to like, at least all the protagonists at some point have to sit down and think like, okay, like I might not be the one overfishing and clear cutting trees, or maybe I was, and like how did I excuse myself, or like maybe I didn't do that, but like what could I have done to help prevent us from getting to this point? And like them kind of all having to take accountability for the agency that they had and that they didn't use. So on the whole, there are some elements in here that I really enjoyed, but I felt like the execution was lacking. It was quite an effort for me to get invested in the story. There was a long time where I felt like I was adrift. So I feel like if you're someone who has like the attention span, like you're looking for like a read that you want to like take very slowly and luxuriate in, and you're okay with like taking notes and stuff while you read, then I feel like this is a book for you. But I feel like this is something that is like for a very like specific type of reader. So do you think you'll be giving this book a read? Is this something that interests you? This is going to be out September 8th. If you like the video, please hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed already and you want to stay up to date with my bookish activities, please do so. Thank you for watching. Have a good one. Goodbye.